Hello, welcome to Light Talks. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Connie, and I am here with my cohort and counterpart, Dr. Orr.
Hi.
Today it is part two of our sacred contracts deep dive, and we are going to be talking about what does it mean to have a sacred contract, what does it mean to break a sacred contract? And what happens if a sacred contract is broken? Um, so let's start off with what does it mean to have a sacred contract, which we all do.
Yeah, we have not just one, not just two, but many, many of them.
Mhm.
Um, in our last video, we talked about how we kind of pre-choose our contracts before coming in. Um, so I recommend our viewers go and watch that video if they haven't yet. I've been rereading Sacred Contracts by Caroline Myss, and she described it in a very beautiful way where we each have fragments of each other's souls.
Mhm.
And when we complete the contract with the other, we we make that exchange. So it's like for me when I read that, I kind of was thinking about like, like a video game, like the old like Mario games or whatever, where you're like you make your place like your safe point and you gain your little coin or whatever. And it goes ding. And it's like adding a piece, right? To
Mhm.
fill in
The wholeness,
the
to
wholeness
create the
of who we
wholeness,
are.
the working
Yeah,
towards wholeness. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
nice.
And the other thing about the sacred contract is that it leads us to whatever our purpose or our many purposes are in life.
Mhm.
Um, and it's kind of like it's a an agreement. It's a
It's related to lessons you've chosen to learn.
yeah, um, yeah, a um pre this lifetime kind of commitment to each other to say, okay, we're gonna meet at this and this point, and we're gonna have this exchange, and we're gonna support each other, right?
Or
So,
not.
or not, or not. And
Or
sometimes
not.
the or not is part of the contract, right?
Mhm.
Because how do we work through that or not? And at other times, which is one of our other questions, is like when they're broken, sometimes because part of what we talked about last week was free will and our ability to choose,
Mhm. Yeah.
sometimes we go, I don't want to proceed with this anymore, and I'm going to tap out.
Right. Right. Just kind of going back to what you were saying initially about sacred contracts and the variety that can exist within sacred contracts is you can have a sacred contract with somebody and it may be completely passive. It
Mm,
can be it can be very active, where you're engaged in relationship, communication, friendship, interaction, teacher, student, where it's a very interactive kind of scenario. And then there can be other folks where their contract is it with you or your contract with them is very passive. So there's not so many actions connected to the sacred contract. It's more of an allowing, it's more of a being present for, it's more of a bearing witness, um, kind of scenario.
can you think of an
So,
example?
um, yeah, I have one pretty prominent example. Uh, but I guess I would say like I'm gonna take it into kind of like uh, a theoretical kind of sibling scenario.
I was thinking sibling.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, because I think that that's probably more relatable for most folks. Um, so say you know you're in a family and you have an older brother, and then the sister is a younger sister, but there's a big age gap. So the older brother is, say, like 12, 13, 14 years older than the younger sister. So that brother, if he was 14 years old when the sister was born, is at a completely different developmental stage in his life. He's, you know, going into high school, like, he's part of got his activities and so on and so forth. So his engagement with his younger sister, when she's a baby, when she's a toddler, when she's in grade school, when she's going into kindergarten, he could be graduating from college.
Hmm.
When she's in grade school, he could be getting married and having his first child, or,
Right.
so his involvement may be more passive support, simply because he's at a different place or stage in life. Now, the flip side of that, could be a situation where an older brother is 18 or 19 years old and there's an accident and the parents leave the planet.
Hmm.
Um, and then he takes on the responsibility of
Raising the.
parenting
Yeah.
that younger sibling. So that to me is kind of like a compare and contrast of um how sometimes a an individual's involvement with somebody that they have a contract with can be more passive, and there might be points where you know you are stuck and you need a ride, and they show up and they're there and they pick you up and they take you home and make sure you're safe. So it might be a little bit more.
It could also be that the even though the relationship is not happening at the same time, it could be that then the way you're brought up, for example, is based upon how that older sibling was brought
Mm,
up, right? The
yeah,
lessons, the mistakes, the understanding that the parent now has based on
from
already having,
experience, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Um, Another idea of like this passive contract would kind of be like something more like environmental or global that's happening. So
Mm,
where it's not necessarily happening directly to you with somebody you're having a relationship with, but it's happening like across the globe or across the
right,
country or like whoever, like
right.
COVID or,
Natural disasters,
yeah.
war in Ukraine,
Right, like
those kinds of
something
things.
big happening and you're living in that space and that time, or it happened previously. Like,
Mhm.
and you're born into a family who went through whatever traumatic experience in the past,
Mhm. Yeah,
and now you're the future generation of that. And how do
right.
you,
Navigate
what
that.
is your life purpose based on that
The
experience?
connection, the contract to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. Um, so next we wanted to address what happens, or what does it mean when um what does it mean to break a contract? And uh scenarios where that would happen. Because like you mentioned free will
Mhm.
earlier in the video, and free will is definitely part of sacred contracts. In some ways, your choices are the most important piece of your sacred contracts, because what you're choosing either moves things, forward,
Mhm.
or stagnates things.
Yeah. So to break a contract would kind of look like, hold on, do you hear mommy? Oh, he's walking away. Okay. So to break a contract, um, there are a few ways to look at it. So like one way is if you're going down your road and you have a fork in the road and you have
Mhm.
to decide, right? Am I going to make a left or am I going to make a right? Am I going to I've been accepted to two different schools, one in Boston and one in Chicago. Which school am I going to choose? Right? Like, and there is those life decisions are going to lead you potentially into different area. There he comes. Hi, I'm working right now.
Excellent. So we also wanted to talk about what does it mean to break a sacred contract?
Um, okay, so I guess there's we talked about free will, we talked about choice.
Hmm.
When you are seeing, when you are meeting that person or that situation, you get to decide how you're going to respond to it. And a lot of the time, you're gonna respond. I think when we're in this physical body, we're making decisions based on um, our soul is making a decision, our intuition is making a decision, and our conditioning is making a decision, right? So, like,
Hmm.
if we're making decisions from a place of fear, it's going to be easier to break the contract.
Hmm. Okay.
And if we're
Okay.
conscious of it, so it's like you can make decisions from a place of fear constantly, but be very unconscious about it. So
Right.
eventually, your soul is going to direct you so much to, I have to deal with this.
Right. And then you'll get one of those kind of almost like a dead end. You'll hit a wall where it's like you have no other option than to make a choice, make a decision, continue with the sacred contract or break the sacred
Yeah,
contract,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And if you're making decisions out of fear, but you're conscious of being afraid, then you would just go, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want
Mhm.
to do this anymore. And I think, like, I'm trying to think of some examples that would apply. Um, you know, addict who has children,
Mm. Okay.
and the children come in, or the child comes in, and part of the child's purpose here and contract here is to get their parent out of that addict and into recovery.
Mhm.
And the parent can go, okay, I'm going to get some support, I'm going to get some help, and I'm going to get out of my addiction.
Mhm.
Or they can go deep in there and
Mhm.
decide against it.
And on the flip side, the child also, who has exhausted all of their willingness to provide support or try and help, has tried, every which way they can to provide that support and that opportunity for that parent who is in the addict. They can also decide to, I'm not doing this anymore, and
Right,
and let go and walk away.
right. The tricky part, and this is, you and I have both worked with this, is finding out what is the contract and what is the breaking of the contract, right? Because some contracts, the child is literally here to go, I'm going to support my parents just by being me, right?
Mhm.
Not by pushing, shoving, you know,
Right.
controlling, manipulating, but just by being me, I'm going to support my parents, my parent into moving into recovery. But sometimes, let me re-say this. So sometimes the the sometimes the parent not going into recovery, to continue on with this example, is part of the contract for the child to be able to find their own abilities
Mhm.
of independence, of freedom, of whatever those are, right? According to their archetypical patterns and their contracts and purpose. So sometimes that is the contract, that the parent
Mhm.
isn't going to step up, right?
Right.
The tricky part is figuring out when is that the contract or when is that breaking of the contract. Because
Yeah,
sometimes what seems like breaking the contract is actually the contract.
the contract. Yeah, yeah. So sacred contracts can be very complex. And that's why it's so wonderful to be in a place, for myself where I am consistently doing the work. And as I do the work, all of those layers and all of that information then comes into conscious awareness, at the pace that I'm ready to receive it, at the time that I'm ready to receive that awareness,
Hmm.
paying attention and being open and willing to receive that information and that clarity
Yeah,
is it's always really helpful in making good choices
yeah,
for yourself, making good choices for yourself.
yeah. Um,
I feel like there's so much to say
there
about
is.
what it means to break a sacred contract, because there's so many individual scenarios that can play out for folks. And I would just ask our viewers, um, if they feel like they've ever experienced the breaking of a sacred contract in their life. I wonder if it's more common than, like, I guess for me, initially, when I think about, breaking of the contract, I'm like, well, if you took all this time and you sat down with your soul family and you like had these conversations and you created the contract, like, why would you break the contract?
Yeah,
Why would you choose to
yeah,
break the contract?
yeah. I think because of fear. I think because it's difficult.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think it's very common. I think it's fairly rare.
Mm.
I would say like 4 or 5% of the population is kind of my read.
Mhm.
Uh, how common it is. Um,
Which I mean, that's such a small number. That's
it's
like
a really small number.
such a small number,
Yeah.
and then it makes me think like, let's start a support group for folks who have their contracts broken.
Yeah, I think most of the time we feel like the contract is broken. I think that's much more common, is that
Mm.
feeling of
Yeah.
that person left me. It didn't go the way I wanted it to. Um,
Mm.
you know, I didn't sign up for this. Um, right? Like,
Yes, you did.
yes, you did. Yeah. These things that we say to ourselves, um, because we're upset with how the situation is. But
So let's pause for a second on
yeah,
that idea, because that makes me think of, I feel like so many people can relate to that. Like, this didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go, or I wanted it to go, or I desired to go, or I fantasized it was going to go, or whatever. So how would you give folks a simple kind of protocol to feel into the that awareness and that clarity? Because I remember for myself when I was first starting, um, that journey of learning to trust myself and trust my intuition. And this to me feels like a place where that could apply.
One of my favorite questions is, where is God in this?
Mm.
Kind of looking at, and it doesn't have to be God, it can be whatever other, people want to use, but bringing in this divine frequency to every situation.
Mhm.
And what we could do is like leave our physical, this body and go up a little bit and kind of view it from the top and go, okay, what am I not seeing?
Mhm.
Um,
Another thing that I have worked with my clients on is standing in mountain pose and asking the question, like really making sure that you're grounded in mountain pose. Um, Shoulders rolled back, you're in mountain pose, everything's relaxed, and then ask the question. And if you feel yourself move forward,
yeah.
it's a yes. And if you feel yourself move backwards, it's a no. Um, and that may take some practice, like, you know,
Sometimes it happens like this.
right. Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But I think making sure, like, I know when I first started, it was like I was like asking you questions that asking my intuition questions that I absolutely 100% knew the answer to, and like would ask 3 times, see if I got the same answer,
Uh-huh.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
I know that that's how some people like choose their groceries. They'll hold like the cucumber and they'll see if they fall. I mean,
right,
it's your
right,
own. It's a way to muscle test, right? It's a way to,
right, yeah, yeah,
yeah. It's a very,
it's
but I love that. I think that's a really good recommendation to do. Um, and so the question, what would the question be? The question would be, um, am I meant to be where I'm at right now? Um, um,
is
what
this
else?
in is this in uh is this part of my sacred contract?
Yeah, is this?
Is
Yeah,
this experience part of my sacred
yeah,
contract? Is this person part of my sacred contract? Um, does this action move me forward in my divine life purpose?
yeah,
Does this action or this relationship take me further away from like it I feel like it's important how you phrase the question.
mhm,
Um, and sometimes simpler is better,
yeah,
yet you want to be specific enough
yeah,
to be able to get and trust a clear response.
yeah, yeah. May I move forward? Yeah, mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Am I missing anything?
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
I mean, I think another great question would be, um, is there is there something, how do I even ask this question? Is there something in my subconscious that I'm not yet aware of? Is there something I need to bring to conscious awareness in order to move forward?
yeah,
Um, I think those things can help,
yeah,
because ultimately it's about gaining clarity, and like you kind of were saying, going up a little and gaining that higher perspective where you can see more of the landscape. I love that scene in Dead Poets Society where Robin Williams' character has folks step up on the desk, and it's just like, they're sitting at their desks and their viewpoint and perspective is one, and then they get up on the desk and then they're like looking at the room from
I
like a
love
whole
it.
new level. And I just,
Love it.
for some reason, when I first saw that movie and I saw that scene, I it just resonated with me so much. And then when
Mhm.
I was in college, it I was fearless about being willing to like put my face on the ground, or like
Mm,
go to the go to the roof of the building to
Yeah.
just gain a new perspective.
Perspective.
And now it's like with yoga, it's like headstand, handstand, and you just shift your perspective completely.
I love that. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would add also oracle cards, um,
Hmm.
animals, paying attention to the symbols that come to you, paying
Yeah.
attention to the things that people say to you. We talked a little bit about how people speak in
Hmm.
a previous episode. So, like, paying attention to things that repeat, right? The patterns that repeat. Um, Most likely, if you've had like 10 people drop out of your life, it's most likely not that 10 people decided they're going to break their contract with you. It's it's
That's
much
a
more
message for
likely that
you.
there's a message there. That is
Right.
the contract, right?
Right.
Looking at the patterns,
Right.
starting to like understand what the patterns mean,
Hmm.
and analyzing them to a point where you're like, oh, that is my
That
message.
that's my message. And then the other thing I just will add is if you hear the same phrase, the same message, in a song or in a conversation you overhear in line or, whatever, it's like chances are there's there's something in that for
Yeah.
you.
Yes. Either you're hearing it or you're saying it. Yeah.
Right.
Attention to both.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Um, so what happens if a contract is broken, a sacred contract is broken?
Dum, dum, dum. Um,
Oh,
I
well, I
wish.
mean, it's definitely a pebble in a pond situation where it ripples out.
Yes.
So
It's because
it's
your
not just
contract is not
right,
just right. It's not just with one other person. It ripples because then that
right,
person is not able to continue on their contract with somebody else. And
right,
so, like, right?
right. Yeah.
I think that's part of what karma is. I think that
Mm,
then we have to keep figuring that out in the future cycle of our whatever our next life is, right? Because
hmm.
then when we die, we go in and part of us is missing because
Hmm.
we didn't get that part. If we look at those fragments that we're picking up from the other soul and doing
Right,
an exchange, we didn't pick up that part. So
right.
there's an
So then you're gonna have
energy
to pick it
missing.
up at a later date and time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think when contracts are broken, it, like you said, it's such a small percentage, and it has to be. I guess for me, it has to be like a very extreme like situation or scenario for a contract to be broken. Because I can't imagine a higher self or a soul
Hmm.
in bliss body sitting down at the, you know, soul contract conference room, so to speak,
Yeah.
and making a sacred contract and then instantly being like, yeah, and no.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm out. Peace out. You're
Yeah,
on
I
your
think
own.
it takes a lot of, again, that conditioning of like how that person was brought up to then make the decision to bail out is a pretty it's pretty significant. It's a pretty significant decision. I also want to add the divine intervention. I want us to remember that there is grace, right? There's divine grace. I believe that God and divinity is very loving and with unconditionally. So I don't
Hmm.
believe that when you get there to whatever, when you're dying and you get to the gates of heaven or whatever you want to, however you want to look at it, I don't believe that you have this judge that goes, you broke the contract, you're out, like jail time or like, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
believe
yeah.
any of that. I really, we talked about this. It's part of the evolution, the soul's growth, how you're evolving in your soul level. And another episode where we talked about, our souls being fragments, and so we're all parts of each other, right? So we're all
Hmm.
supporting the evolution of everybody else.
Everyone, and some of us at different levels than others.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to say about what happens when a contract is broken is that I believe that it's very painful. It's very painful for the soul that breaks the contract, and it's very painful for all the other souls that were in contact with that contract. Sacred contracts, a deep dive. We've definitely we've definitely just touched on sacred contracts and what happens when they're broken. Many people can have their own unique variation or experience with that, and navigating it is, I would say, it's definitely something that you're going to want support with, uh, if it's coming to your conscious awareness. So, is there anything else you want to add with regard to sacred contracts before
I
we
would
wrap
say
up?
not to overthink things, right? Not
Or
to
try and control things?
yeah, not try to control, not try to overthink. It's you can choose A, B, or C. If the contract is there, you're gonna get to that contract regardless of your choice.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And trusting the process.
Yeah.
And that requires faith and belief and awareness and consciousness and presence. So I think
Yeah.
that's great. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please make sure you put them below, or the links to both Dr. Orr's website and my website is there, where you can find our email addresses if it's not something you want to put um, underneath this video, and you can email us directly, and we'll do our best to reply to any questions that you might have. Uh, any announcements that you would like to make?
We still have a contest going on. We're still building up to our 500 subscribers. So please subscribe, share, comment, participate in our contest.
Hit the notification bell.
Yes, new videos every Monday. Throughout the month of June, we're having our vision statement workshop. Sundays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can find the link with all the information below in the description of the video. We would love to see you there. I think those are all our announcements.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.